And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us once again across the Louisiana plain, where we are in our perch, elevating the cause of constitutional conservatism and freedom, advancing the cause of constitutional conservatives across our state and beyond, and slowly but surely draining the Louisiana swamp. My name is Chris.
And I'm Danielle, and this is The State of Freedom, brought to you by Louisiana First Patriots. Hello, State of Freedom warriors. Thank you for having us along for part of your day. We are so thankful to have you, the best listening family in the world, and we are only here because of your encouragement, your prayers, and your financial support. If you're looking for a way to support us, to advertise with us, or to send us feedback, please do that. We'd love to hear from you. Visit our website at freedomstate.us. We'd also really appreciate it if you'd help us get the word out and spread the reach of the State of Freedom. Like our show on whatever platform you listen to us, subscribe to it and share it. You can share short clips instead of the full episodes if you want to do that. You can do it at our YouTube and Rumble channels, and the links to those are always in the show notes and over on freedomstate.us. Well, today we will be continuing the conversation about the Declaration of Military Accountability. We are so honored to have a great warrior for freedom and justice with us today, a man who is a courageous voice of truth, Louisiana's very own Lieutenant Colonel Tommy Waller. Before we bring in Lieutenant Colonel, let me read the scripture of the day. It is Proverbs chapter 16, verses 3 and 4. And it says, "Before you do anything, put your trust totally in God and not in yourself. Then every plan you make will succeed. The Lord works everything together to accomplish his purpose. Even the wicked are included in his plans. He sets them aside for the day of disaster." And we often say on this show that the work is up to us and the results are up to God. And Chris often quotes John Quincy Adams saying that duty is ours and the results are God's. What I love about this scripture is that it says, before you do anything, the assumption is that we're going to do something. We're not supposed to be waiting around for the Lord to do everything for us. We are called according to his purpose, and we are his instruments, his hands and feet. The Apostle Paul taught us that we are co-laborers with Christ. So when we're busy about our Father's business, we can rest with confident assurance that the results are up to him, and the fate of the wicked is also up to him.
And we don't have all the answers all the time as we're moving forward. I mean, I can't tell you, there are people who spend their whole lives waiting for a perfect setup, waiting for that perfect fastball coming right down the middle of the plate to knock it out of the park. Sometimes you got to swing at a curveball and knock it out too. We don't always have all the answers when we want the answers, and that's why we have faith. We're being called to pray and then move forward and know that God will open things up as he should. And I know that our guest today, Lieutenant Colonel Tommy Waller, former U.S. Marine, a man after my own heart because my dad was a Marine and loved the Marine Corps, currently president of the Center for Security Policy. Tommy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, Chris, Danielle, thank you for having me on. And I love the Proverbs verse that you shared. In fact, it echoes a daily devotional that I read every day called God Calling. The last part of it talked about, do not plan ahead. I will only reveal the path to you one step at a time. Don't try to carry tomorrow's burden today. I am the great burden bearer. You cannot bear my load. I only expect you to carry a small backpack of today's concerns. And so, yeah, I know that a lot of us, as we look at the world ahead of us, if you put that in the context of a rucksack, it would just be too heavy to carry. And we have to lay it at the foot of the cross.
It is so easy.
Yeah, so well said.
Yeah, that is so well said, Tommy. It is so easy, and I know it's my own tendency to look at all the things at one time and just feel so overwhelmed. It's such a good reminder, what you just said, to carry the small knapsack of today's concerns. We're responsible for today, and tomorrow we will be there then, but we're not there now. And it really does help to stay focused on the present moment and on the present task. So thank you for that reminder. It's very timely. We talked yesterday with former First Lieutenant Mark Bashaw about the Declaration of Military Accountability, signed by well over 200 current and former military members in the United States, essentially demanding accountability on the part of the top military officials in the United States for the coercive efforts to force vaccine mandates, kicking people out of the military, refusing people for not taking the vaccine. You are a signer of that very, very important Declaration of Accountability. What are your thoughts on it? What do you hope to accomplish with it?
Yeah, so I was honored to sign that declaration because I do believe accountability is necessary to restore the trust and confidence of the American people in the senior military leadership. And it's not just the uniformed members of the military, the general officers at the top. It's also the civilian equivalents. You've got a lot of SES government employees that are supposed to be the continuity, so to speak, for like the Department of Defense. You have the service secretaries, which are civilians. You have Secretary Austin. All of those senior leaders are ones that failed catastrophically when it comes to the vaccine mandate. They failed in a number of ways, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And the American people, at least many American people, I know my own family, it's going to be very difficult to, we see a recruiting crisis right now, right? Now, I don't see that recruiting crisis being fixed until you see some accountability for that. And there's obviously more than just the vaccine mandate. For me, that was the kind of the final straw in my career. But look, y'all, we've had failure after failure by the present leadership of the Department of Defense. Look at Afghanistan. There's a list that you could make really where these leaders have willfully refused to address profound threats to our security, both ideological threats and even infrastructure-related threats to our peril, right? And so the vaccine mandate was just the latest of those, but it was one of the most profound, and it was where I personally decided to plant my flag and take a stand, and unfortunately that resulted in the end of my career as well.
Yeah, and we're going to be able to talk about that shortly. I know, Tommy, that there were some congressional oversights in connection with the Afghanistan withdrawal and some other issues as far as woke policies in the military. I don't know that there have been congressional hearings yet on the vaccine mandates in the military. This declaration that we just talked about just was made public, I think, a couple of days ago. Are you aware of any feedback from either the Congress or the DOD on this as of yet?
No. I mean, I've seen some news headlines, such things as Congressman Gates, making comments about it and being supportive of it. I do know that there have been issues with the links that were used being cyber attacked, for example, which tells you that something's going on. If you're taking flak, you're over the target. So I do anticipate that we've seen certain public affairs officers out there in the DOD making negative comments about it on Twitter. So it is most likely getting some attention, but I do think that there will be an effort to really ignore it or kind of sweep it under the rug, much the same way that we've seen anything related to the vaccine mandate that's been detrimental. And you judge things by their fruits, and when you look at the fruits of the vaccine mandate, I can't see a single one that was positive on any level: spiritual, legal, moral, ethical, or medical. And I'm not a doctor, obviously, but it's pretty clear that the vaccine did not work and most likely is causing immense harm. So those are things that unfortunately the present leadership seems to have done everything they can to sweep under the rug. And so it is important, the accountability piece. There is one thing coming up in the next 24 hours, though, that I would like to share with y'all that could be a beacon of hope in that regard.
Please do.
Yeah, I'd like to hear it.
Yeah, so tomorrow, at least in the next 48 hours, but I believe tomorrow, the Supreme Court should take up a really important case. And it's a case, your listeners can just Google search Robert v. Austin case before the Supreme Court. And that's a case where, if you think back, I guess this would be a good time for us to turn the clock back and think about the mandate, right, and how it was imposed, and sort of some of the things that service members were trying to do to avoid having to subject themselves to an experimental, what some call a vaccine, some call gene therapy. Let's just call it a vaccine for the moment. Staff Sergeant Dan Robert was a drill instructor at the time at Fort Benning in Georgia, and had already had COVID and was trying to make the case that natural immunity ought to exempt him from that vaccination. This is a similar argument that thousands of service members were making, and I think rightfully so. And until this mandate, there was, if you demonstrated natural immunity, you didn't have to get vaccinated against something, right? So COVID was the first time that changed. And so this court case is one where if the Supreme Court were able to review the evidence on this case and they were able to decide in favor of natural immunity and in favor of freedom, that would be a really significant win. Because so far, what we've seen are all these, well, not all, but most of the cases, the military cases with respect to the vaccine mandates, they've been thrown out of the courts because they just say, like, well, the military dropped the mandate, right? And so what that's done is it's hurt accountability, and it's hurt our ability to prevent future unconstitutional medical mandates because the courts have thrown those out. So we really just got to pray the Supreme Court will hear the Robert versus Austin case, that they'll review the evidence, and that they'll make the right judgment calls on accountability in that one.
And it's unfortunate, Tommy, that the U.S. Supreme Court is having to weigh in on this to begin with. I mean, up until COVID, as you alluded to a moment ago, the idea of natural immunity was an accepted fact of science. And most doctors, to my knowledge, believe that natural immunity actually provided more robust protection against viruses than vaccines, if not at least equal protection. So the idea that a court is having to come in and order the military to honor documented natural immunity against a virus, to me, is a very sad commentary on where the military is right now.
Yeah, indeed, Chris, that's right. I mean, it should not take the Supreme Court, right? I mean, let's just talk. So if we want to transition the conversation from the medical part of it, let's go into the moral and ethical and legal part of this, right? And you think about, like, it shouldn't take the Supreme Court to figure that out either. When this mandate was coming, when we saw, so when COVID hit initially, right, I think a lot of us looked at that and we said, okay, that sure is interesting that this virus appeared in close proximity to the only level 4 biological research facility in communist China. That's what we would call a clue, right? And then, and so, but what happened back then? Anybody who tried to bring that up, they were ridiculed and deplatformed, censored, but that was relevant, right? Because the same type of ridicule and censoring and deplatforming also happened, and even in a greater form, to anybody who started to question the vaccine and its effectiveness and all that, right? And so as this mandate was approaching, I at the time, I was the commander of 3rd Force Recon Company. It's the Marine Corps Reserve's only Force Recon company. A bunch of just great American patriots. And as the CO, I'm looking at this and I'm saying, oh my gosh, I can see the writing on the wall that they're going to require this vaccine, right? And I owe it to myself and my Marines just to do as much research as possible. And I told myself, I'm not a medical professional, right? I'm not a doctor. Like I'm an infantry guy, right? But I can research, and in my civilian capacity, I do a lot of research. And we'll talk about that later. The nonprofit that I work for, and so I took a lot of time. In fact, I clocked in for it, 22 hours over the 4th of July holiday weekend in 2021 to research the vaccine and its medical issues. And I made a commitment to myself that I would only use sources that were pro-vaccine. right? Like, so you get the label anti-vax, right, for any questioning. So I said, let me just do this and only take pro-vaccine sources, and put together a whole package of information that showed some extremely worrisome potential of this, mRNA technology and these COVID vaccines. And I tried to get it to the medical staff above me in the chain of command, and there was really no written response. Very few conversations that people would want to have about it. And the one thing, and to his credit, there was an officer above me in the chain of command who did care about me, and he said, "Look, Tommy, you got to understand, this is political. And so you better be really careful how you proceed, because you're going to be crushed like an ant." Right? And he told me that because he cared about me, right? And so I was careful. I was very respectful. I tried everything I could to, within the context of, the procedures that we had, to bring this up, right? And so the medical parts were ignored. And so then that brought us to the next step, which is the accommodation process, right? Which y'all asked about earlier. And so I'd be happy to sort of share with you what I think, what I was thinking then, and then now as I look back on it, what I think I've begun to realize, may have happened there.
Yeah. Before you do that, Tommy, just a quick question back on the Robert v. Austin case that you're expecting to get taken up in the next day or so. You were talking about kind of immunity versus the vaccine requirement. Is there any hope or thinking that the court will say you don't actually have to show anything because you don't owe anybody any answers about why you would want to put something into your body that's not medically proven, period? Is that a possibility?
I think we need to pray. I think we need to pray for that, right? Because that ultimately is, at the end of the day, that's what it should be about, is freedom. Exactly. That's a great question. Daniel, I don't have an answer to that, but I think that's something to pray for, is for it not only to be, serve as a platform to allow national immunity to be an exemption basis, but also just the fact that if you don't want it because you're free, yeah.
Because it's fundamental. That's a great question, Danielle, because fundamentally it's a constitutional issue. Fundamentally,
it is.
That's right. And one of the things I should make sure your listeners know about is, when you talk about it being a constitutional issue, if you want to understand the nuances of that, there is a fabulous book written by an active duty Navy Commander Robert Greene, called Defending the Constitution Behind Enemy Lines, a story of hope for those who love liberty. That book is about this mandate and how it really was irreconcilable with the Constitution that our founders created. And so I would just encourage all your listeners to get that, Defending the Constitution Behind Enemy Lines by Rob Greene. And, my wife was telling me, you should really write a book about your experiences with this vaccine mandate, because so many people need to hear the story, and, you can articulate it. And I'm so glad I didn't write that book, because Rob Greene did 10 times better than I ever could have. And so I just would really encourage y'all to read it. Perfect.
And Mark mentioned it as well.
Yeah, Mark mentioned it as well. And last question on this particular issue, the book that you're talking about, Defending the Constitution Behind Enemy Lines, that the scope of that is medical protocols within the context of the military, right?
That's right. Yeah, and sort of the legal and moral and ethical parts that were that had to do with the mandate and how those things were violated. Exactly.
Got it.
Yeah, it doesn't get into the medical piece as much as the legal, moral, and ethical piece. And of course, both are important.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about your personal experience, Tommy, about when you submitted. Obviously, you followed the protocol for yourself personally. I'm sure you submitted an exemption. What kind of exemption did you submit? And just in short term, what was the process and outcome of that?
Yeah, so when you look back on it, the government in general and major corporations, they all kind of signaled, hey, look, don't worry. there's going to be a process for exemptions, right? Particularly religious exemptions. And so you think back on that time frame where there's all this anxiety and uncertainty about the vaccine. There was a really kind of a narrative out there about, hey, calm down, don't worry about it. Just tell us your strongly held religious beliefs, right? This is the exemption process. This is what you need to tell us. Okay. Now looking back on it, I'm a little concerned that was a really, really effective data harvesting operation. And it might sound kind of crazy, like, wait a minute, what? But if you think about it, a whole bunch of Americans willfully turned over to the federal government and to major corporations on paper, they're strongly held religious beliefs. But that's exactly what I did, right? So I sat down and I did.
You're so right.
I did exactly what they told me.
I never even thought of that.
I never
I did
even
the same.
thought about that. That is such
dear.
a great point. Yeah, great point.
Yeah, so because you in the moment you're just trying to get through it and you try to do the right thing, right? Then you reflect on it. You're like, wow. Gosh, there's a database somewhere probably with a lot of information that if you wanted to identify people of certain religious beliefs, well, then you got that on paper and it's signed by the person saying this is what I believe, right? So that's I think it's relevant to be thought about. But so we go back and I thought, okay, I'm the CEO of this really awesome unit, so a bunch of really elite Marines. Who do a lot of special things. A lot of money goes into training and bringing these Marines up to the point where they can do what a force recon team can do. So clearly there probably should be some weight in my own religious accommodation. If I do a good job of it and I put that downrange first to send it up to the chain of command, maybe I can kind of prep it so the rest of the Marines behind me will have a better shot, right? And so look, y'all, I put so much into this, I could send you a copy. It was just a ton of time and effort and research. And so I made 8 separate points. The first 2 were personal, right? My strongly held religious beliefs and my own convictions of conscience. And then the other 6 aspects of it were moral principles. And what I did, I'm Roman Catholic. I took the Catechism of the Catholic Church. And I went through it and I identified the various moral principles, right? The moral principle of relying on one's conscience to bear witness to the authority of truth. The moral principle of relying on one's conscience to promote reason and prudence, right? The moral obligation for the government to pursue that answer to a fundamental question, which was, what is the, quote, compelling government interest in the COVID vaccine mandate, right? Because that's what we kept hearing. There's a, quote, compelling government interest. What's the, and so I was able to lay out in each of these principles. The other one, promoting transparency and upholding the law. And so I was able to show, here's what the law says, here's how you're violating it. Here are things that show that there's problems with the vaccine, and here are evidence that transparency is not being made for the American people. And then the last 2 were just the moral principle of upholding the golden rule, and then preventing what's called ethical drift, right? I remembered as a commander in New Orleans, Louisiana, having the civilian equivalent to our 3-star general talk to all the commanders about the importance of preventing something called ethical drift. And he said, if there's ethical drift, you're gonna identify, you're gonna have this uneasy feeling in your gut, right? And you'll know. And I laid out in this religious accommodation request how the vaccine mandate was a profound ethical drift. And just like every other Marine that submitted it, and just know that it had enclosures and references. It was 317 pages with all of those enclosures and references. It was denied with every other Marine's denial that I know on November 10th, 2021, on the Marine Corps birthday, with the same blanket letter. And I think that was meant for a reason. It was done in a blanket fashion. It was done on the Marine Corps birthday to inflict a moral injury on those who sought religious accommodations. And so then, of course, like any other Marine who wanted to appeal, I appealed within the time frame. One-page letter to the commandant, and I just poured my heart out to him. This is a man who attended Tulane University. So did I. This is a man that commanded recon Marines. So did I. This was a combat veteran, and I heard him talk to myself and all of our spouses, and I had a lot of respect for him. And I said, look, I've always told every Marine I serve with, if I as a commander ever do anything that you say, gosh, if I was ever a lieutenant colonel, I would never want to do that. If something like that happens, you got to tell somebody, right? And I poured my heart out to that general officer in this letter, sent it to the Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps at the time, who I served with. He knows me. No response, nothing. And I waited and waited for a year, and I got no response. And the last part of that story I'll tell you, it's local to Louisiana, right? I went to get a new ID card in March of last year. My ID card was going to expire. I needed to continue checking the system, the email, to see if I would have an answer to this religious accommodation. And I wanted at the time to have my wife and children get their ID cards, to have them go on base to see the memorial for the fallen Marines who paid the ultimate sacrifice. There's a beautiful spot right there on base, on a certain section of the building. It's an unclassified space that has the pictures of all these Marines. It's called the Hall of Heroes. And I just wanted my family to see that. And we weren't allowed on base. And, I was told COVID protocol at the time. And so, I look over at my wife, and she's got tears in her eyes. It's 20 years of sacrifice, right? And not allowed on base. And that was the last time that I stepped foot on a military installation, about a year ago. And so I waited for a year. I got no answer on my accommodation. I could find no unit that would allow me to serve with them. And then I went ahead and after a lot of prayer and being asked to take over as the new president and CEO of this nonprofit Center for Security Policy, I prayed about it. Said I can't continue to just wait for Uncle Sam to do the right thing. And I submitted my retirement paperwork. And so they tell you it takes 4 months for it to process. And Danielle, Chris, in 2 weeks' time, I got a package approved. It was a fast.
Wow.
So they never respond to your very, very thoughtful, exhaustively researched request for a religious exemption, but within 2 weeks of your request, of tendering your resignation, they authorize your resignation from the Marine Corps.
The retirement, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, the retirement from the Marine Corps.
Yeah, fastest. It
sounded like they were happy to have a thorn out of their side, huh?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that there was, I'm sure, a list of officers in particular, because.
Have you received an answer yet?
Oh, yeah, it was approved. My retirement was approved right away.
No, not the retirement. Have you ever received any explanation regarding or response regarding your request for a religious exemption?
No.
Other than silence?
No, none at all. No, not at all. No, and I don't anticipate that there will be any. There.
Sounds very un-Marine-like.
Yeah, no, it's and that's why there's accountability that's necessary. But look, Chris, Danielle, I am so blessed. Okay, I don't want your listeners to get the impression that I'm, complaining. I am so blessed. I was allowed to change command in October of 2021 to turn over the unit to another commander, and it was like 4 hours after that change of command that they passed the guidance that any unvaccinated commander would be immediately relieved. So they waited until I was out of the way, right? I could have been court-martialed or something. I mean, I was allowed to retire. I was very blessed. There were so many service members who fared so much worse than me, right? And that's where the accountability is necessary. I mean, look, young service members just kicked out of the Marine Corps. I'm not going to mention the name, a buddy of mine who very few are coming back. It's the only one I know so far in terms of like the reversal of the mandate. They're trying to invite service members to come back in. There's only one that I know of. But, I'll give you an example. For him, he's like, what do I even check in at my unit? How do I even check in? I don't have any uniforms. They took everything from him. They said, get up in your barracks room. We're going to come to your barracks and we're going to inspect all of your property that is Marine Corps property, and you will not leave with anything. You will never have anything that has any tie to the United States Marine Corps. And they took everything. They took his belt, his socks, his identification card, thousands of dollars worth of uniforms. So now he's trying to get back in, and he doesn't have anything to check in at his unit. Well, where is that stuff, right? Well, where's the accountability for the officer above him who treated him so poorly? The Marine Corps especially was very enthusiastic about punishing Marines and making it as painful as possible. Not every commander, okay? I know general officers out there that did everything they could to shelter the men and women underneath them. I'll never say their name, because if I did, they'd be on the chopping block. But as an institution, it catastrophically failed.
It sounds like it. Why do you think it is that was it because of your relationship with your superior officers that you were, it looks like, given a bit more of a cushion in there of a year or so to make a decision and ultimately allowed to resign, rather than them acting in such a draconian manner toward you?
Oh, so let me clarify that real quick, Chris. So when I say that I had a year, I had to do what every other reserve Marine had to do at the time, which is either get the vaccine after they denied your accommodations and your appeals, or drop to the individual ready reserve, the IRR. When you drop to the IRR, you lose your TRICARE medical benefits. You lose the privilege to access the email systems and all those things. That's why my ID card, they gave me a new one, there's no chip on it or anything. So it was a situation where they were able to remove people from being able to serve to get any sort of benefits, but still keep them on the rolls so they could tell Congress that they still had certain numbers, right? It was a real crafty way. And so it wasn't like I was definitely preserved in terms of like I said, they waited until I was kind of out of the way to pass the guidance that any unvaxxed commander would be relieved. But I had no special treatment after that necessarily, right? Like every reserve Marine was in the same boat, having to drop to the IRR. And I don't know if that helps kind of clarify that a little bit.
Yeah. Does that the ones who were forced out because they refused the vaccine mandate, how is that classified on their military record, Tommy? Does that go down as a dishonorable discharge, a court-martial? How is that classified?
Yeah, it kind of depends, Chris. I'm glad you asked the question, because that's another piece of evidence for at least the Marine Corps in the process by which they use to discharge Marines that refused. So the UCMJ, the Uniform Code of Military Justice, has two, like anytime you separate a service member, at least in the Marine Corps, you've got to provide a reason. And the UCMJ, the Uniform Code of Military Justice, has certain codes, right? So like, let's just say you have a pattern of misconduct. There's a code for that if somebody keeps getting in trouble. And in the case of the vaccine mandate, there are two different codes that would have been the most appropriate ones to use. That would be refusing inoculation or refusing medical treatment. And the Marine Corps chose not to use those two codes. What they chose to use was the code commission of a serious offense, which is a code, a misconduct code, right? And so, like, if someone is separated because of something like a crime or potentially even like a sexual assault or something like that, they can use this commission of a serious offense code to make sure that it's known that it's misconduct. And what that also does is it allows the separation authority, whoever is making the final decision on the separation of that Marine, it allows them the opportunity to strip the honorable characterization of their service. It doesn't mean they have to, but it allows them to. And so if you would like to, dishonorably discharge, or other than honorable, or, anything but honorable, that allows you the opportunity to do so. And I think that's terribly wrong. And I think it was meant to inflict another moral injury.
Absolutely. It sounds completely malicious.
If you do use that code and decide for the service member to give them anything but an honorable discharge, depending on what kind of discharge they get, you also don't just inflict a moral injury, but you have the opportunity to inflict economic damages and injuries as well. You can strip that service member's ability to get future educational benefits through the GI Bill, for example. You can make it very difficult for them to get a clearance or a job in the future. So you're afforded a lot of opportunity to really harm a young service member through the use of that code.
What was that code used to your knowledge, and if so, how often? In other words, are there some Marines that you're aware of whose classification reads dishonorable discharge or other than honorable?
So the code itself, to my knowledge, is what was used exclusively, the commission of a serious offense. Yeah. The characterization of service, though, that varied widely by whoever was going to make the final decision. And like I said, I know that there are some general officers that were and sergeants major out there who were like, look, y'all, we got to do whatever we can to not be making it tough on these guys, kind of having compassion and mercy. And then there were others that were just brutal, just absolutely brutal. Yeah.
Wow. Well, we'll certainly want to be following this and keeping tabs on, how things go, what kind of recourse is ultimately gained. I hope that we see some positive momentum here soon, because it's just unconscionable the way that people have been treated, people who have laid down their lives on behalf of freedom, treated with such disregard and honestly just completely having a lot of people had their lives destroyed. And I don't even have words for it, Tommy, but we'll certainly be staying in touch with you on this, and we want to see how it moves forward. We are praying for justice, and we'll also be praying that we start seeing justice immediately with this Robert V. Austin case.
Yeah, and hopefully so. But before we move on, Danielle, I have to ask you this, because I'm sure that our listeners, Tommy, are interested in knowing this. Are you open at this point, in light of the rescission of the vax mandate? Are you open for reinstatement? Do you have any desire to return to the U.S. Marine Corps?
I don't think that the Marine Corps at this point, with the present leadership, would be very excited if I tried, just kind of based on the past couple years. As far as my desire to serve, I do not plan on personally serving or suggesting that any of my family members serve until there's accountability, because I don't trust the people who are in charge. Now, that's a very personal decision, and it's, of course, somewhat emotionally driven because of the fact that, if you're not even allowed on base after all the service and sacrifice, that hurts, right? So I'm sure everyone has different circumstances. I'm not going to discourage people from serving if it's their calling, right? We need good people in uniform to right the ship. But at least for, me and my family, I think that the Marine Corps certainly made it pretty clear where it stood in relation to my service and my family's, welcomeness, I guess, if you want to say. And so I'll take them up on that and not plan on putting the uniform back on until it kind of becomes clear that there's people in charge who don't have the same sort of focus as the previous and present leadership.
Well, I certainly hope that we do see big changes at the top levels, because it's desperately needed. And even on that topic, it's actually what I wanted to get to next. You were involved in the extraction of over 20,000 Afghan and American civilians from Afghanistan during the Biden administration's really tragic and botched drawdown of troops. I was in D.C. I had the privilege of being at the Intercessors for America conference, where Chad Robichaux told his story and mentioned your name as being critical in that success. And I think he had many harrowing stories within that story. But maybe would you tell us about your role? And I think it really ties in well to the fact that, the top military has its eyes on the wrong prize right now, the way that all went down.
Sure. Yeah. Well, first of all, let me just tell you, when Chad's the hero. Dennis Price is one of the Marines that was in our unit. Those are the heroes. Okay. And there are others that can't be named, but they're the real participants in the high risk operations. When Chad would have mentioned my name, I didn't do anything heroic at all. All I did is say yes when I had a young staff sergeant stud that had met up with Chad and said, "Hey, sir, Chad's going. He needs, a recon man, sniper to be by his side. You're my boss. Can I go? Right? And so all I did is say yes. I didn't ask permission from anybody above me in the chain of command. And when they found out, they were pretty upset. But he's a reserve Marine. He was not on active duty. He was doing it on his own time, and he was doing something noble and heroic. And so that was one way that I helped, was just allowing some of the most talented people in our country to go and help. The second thing is through Intercessors for America. What a great organization. I literally just got off the phone with Chris Cabal just about 15 minutes before this interview, because we keep in touch with her. I have over the years, so many times when I had really critical things happening, both on the military side and with our Center for Security Policy, and I knew we needed prayer cover, I would get in touch with Intercessors for America. And a lot of times they couldn't even know what it was that was happening, and they would pray. And so when Chad and Dennis and the guys were pushing out, inserting into Afghanistan and the bordering countries, I called up Intercessors for America and said, guys, we need to do a prayer cover. And that's what they did. And when you read Chad's book, if you guys haven't read it, I really recommend it. It's called Saving Aziz. He tells the story of that whole operation. And you'll see in the story, he talks about the anxiety. You think about Chad Robichaux and his story, this sort of post-traumatic stress that he had from 8 tours to Afghanistan, some of which he was alone by himself with the Afghan Special Forces, and the trauma experience there. PTSD is a real thing, and it's something he suffered immensely, and he was on an airplane about to do something just as risky, or if not more. That could have overwhelmed him were it not for the spiritual help that he got.
Incredible story. Just incredible story.
Yeah, it really is. Chad's a hero. Dennis is a hero. There's other unnamed heroes. And so, I didn't do anything heroic. I just connected the prayer warriors with the real warriors. And so, but you asked Danielle about where's keeping your eye on the ball, right? Let's think about the priorities of the U.S. Department of Defense in that year of 2021. Okay, January, February, March, April 2021, the number one priority was the stand down on extremism in the ranks. Okay, right? We were forced, hundreds of man hours were spent on a mandatory stand down on, quote, extremism in the ranks. And it was supposedly because of January 6th, okay? Let me tell you what they did not include in any of that material, where we're supposed to be learning about, quote, extremism in the ranks. 6 examples of uniformed service members who either murdered their fellow service members or planned to do so for the sake of the global Islamic movement. Jihadis, like Fort Hood, Major Nadal Hassan, right? There are 6 examples of U.S. Army soldiers that either did or planned to do that. And none of that was in the material, right? And so you have to ask yourself, what are we actually doing? And that was another one of these steps of trying to create politicalization in the military, right? And so that was the first quarter of 2021, the main focus of DoD. The second half of 2021, the main focus was the vaccine mandate, right? And so I will tell you that in August of 2021, on a conference call with all the commanders and the general officer from the units, this is August as Afghanistan is starting to crumble. There was no discussion of Afghanistan. It was, where's your vaccine mandate percentages, right? So, Danielle, you nailed it. We're failing because we got our eye on the wrong ball time after time after time. And until there's accountability for those who can't seem to have their eye on the right ball, we're going to keep losing.
Is there any, Tommy, how would you rank, scale of 1 to 10, the failure of our president, the failure of the military in that withdrawal from Afghanistan that left just tons of weapons in Afghanistan? I believe you can confirm this. We actually left Americans deserted in Afghanistan. You were able to get a number of them out. But what level of failure, institutional failure, is that in your view?
Well, I think it's a catastrophic failure. This failure, though, starts way back, right? After 9/11. And in fact, our Center for Security Policy published a book last year called Who Lost Afghanistan? Robert Spencer is one of our senior fellows. He is a preeminent expert on Sharia, divine Islamic law, and the Islamic movement. And he has a short book that outlines the 20-year failure. So it didn't just happen. It wasn't just what we witnessed in the catastrophe at the end of 2021. So just know that first and foremost. And all of that can be characterized as catastrophic failure. In fact, that's the name of another book published by the Center for Security Policy, Catastrophic Failure, Blindfolding America in the Face of Jihad. A much thicker book because it tells the entire story. Okay? And so, but when it comes to just the actual operation itself, obviously I'm not going to sit here and quarterback after the fact. I wasn't there, right? But what I can tell you that disappoints me is I know that there must have been generals and very senior civilians in command operations centers around the world who were probably watching as they vacated Bagram. They were probably watching the flatbed trucks coming across the border, right? Because you could see it on Twitter. You could see the videos of the Pakistani trucks coming across the border, going to Bagram and carting off military equipment. And out of all the people who probably witnessed that, who did anything? No, out of all the people who would have gotten the order, hey, you're going to vacate Bagram first before Kabul. What leader said, you know what, find somebody else. I'll put my stars on the table, I'm resigning, right? It basically boiled down to, at the very end, our own military commanders giving the Taliban the list of U.S. citizens that are in Afghanistan, supposedly so they could provide safe passage for them. And that didn't happen.
That is just extraordinary to me, that we would place the lives of American citizens in peril that way by disclosing their identity and their location like that. But speaking of the Center for Security Policy, Tommy, obviously you're no longer in the U.S. Marine Corps. What is, you've sort of alluded to it here, but what does the Center for Security Policy focus on, and what are your main priorities now?
Sure. Yeah. Look, the organization's been around for 35 years, and founder Frank Gaffney worked for President Reagan and found it was very difficult to get the truth sometimes inside of government, and a lot of times it was hard to get the truth about what threatens the republic from outside entities as well. These think tanks that they take government money, they tell the government what they want to hear. They take foreign money. They take defense contractor money or whatever, and they're just trying to promote a product. They say, we're never going to take money from any of those sources. And so what we've done for 35 years is we've provided unconventional expertise, support, and leadership. And it's far-sighted, it's highly courageous, and the purpose is to save America while we still can, right? And so we were speaking truth about Sharia and Jihad when it wasn't popular and getting canceled before canceling was a thing. Now you look at the October 7th attack in Hamas, and people are beginning to wake up to things that we said 15 to 18 years ago would happen. And that's not just, that's on the Jihad threat. When it comes to other threats, the Chinese Communist Party, threats to the U.S. electric grid, things like electromagnetic pulse, that's a whole nother portfolio of issues that I actually personally worked also in uniform and outside of uniform. The things that most other organizations are unwilling to talk about and to address are usually the things that we go after, and they often are some of the most consequential things to our freedom and to our republic. Yeah.
It sounds to me like you're dealing with the most critical infrastructure there is, in ensuring that it is protected and shielding it from threats from nefarious forces that really want to take out our infrastructure.
Well, yeah, Chris, we're certainly trying to, and so we go where there's a willing audience to listen. And thankfully, I'll tell you this, to Frank's credit, he created a state-level outreach program 20 years ago. And back then, if we were going into a state legislature, a lot of times they'd be like, what do you mean national security? That's Uncle Sam's job. And now we can't hardly keep up with the demand around the country of people in state legislatures saying, hey, what do we do about the Chinese investments in our land and agriculture? What do we do about all of these different issues that the federal government's failing on, right? And so it's been a privilege to help states address those things along the way.
And Tommy, you've kind of rattled off a number of really critical issues. What's at the top of your list right now in terms of what's the biggest risks to our security as a nation?
Yeah, I would say at the very top is the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, and its effective method of unrestricted warfare and elite capture, right? And so that would be at the very top. And unfortunately, this Chinese Communist Party can be very effective because of that elite capture. When you have very senior members of governments worldwide, including our own, who really do what the CCP wants it to do, that's a major problem, because then you can't hardly even defend against it if the people making the decisions in your government are making it in such a way that it's favorable to the CCP and unfavorable to your own republic. So I think that's probably number one, and it's multifaceted, right? Because and the other reason it's number one is we're in that fight now. Like, we don't know we're in a war. They know they're in a war, and it's called unrestricted warfare. And so, and it's global, and it's not just in America, but it's also here. I mean, we think there's about 35,000, at least according to the government's numbers, 35,000 Chinese nationals in the United States now, a lot of which came through the border this year. We know, based on open source reporting and statements by Customs and Border Patrol officials, that the procedures by which Chinese nationals would be screened at the border were significantly changed earlier this year to make their processing much different and to allow them into the country much easier. So, in every respect, when you have a major, powerful, economically strong adversary, and I say adversary in the sense of the Chinese Communist Party, not the Chinese people, right, but the Chinese Communist Party, and it has that much influence over governments and corporations, it makes it really difficult to contend with.
Yeah, a lot of people, Tommy, don't understand. They say, okay, well, we're not at war with China. We do business in China, trade with China. We're not in a conventional war with China, so what are you so worried about? But my point would be this. I want you to get your clarification on this. So the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese government right now is engaged in activities that are designed to dismantle the critical infrastructure of our country. And it sounds to me like many of our own leaders don't even understand or recognize that. China looks upon us as an enemy with which they are at war, and too many of our own leaders, including our top military leaders, don't seem to understand that is their mind frame.
Or that they are actually being treasonous themselves.
Possibly so.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it does depend on how you look at the world, as far as like, if your version of taking an oath to the Constitution is such that you think that means that the government is there to protect certain government priorities. So let's say the government decides that a certain group of people are to be protected, and then your oath to the Constitution means protecting those people against other people, right? Then that's one thing. As opposed to understanding what the founders had in mind and looking at the world in such a way that any U.S. citizen is supposed to enjoy certain freedoms that you uphold to protect. When it comes to the Chinese Communist Party and this warfare, Chris, as you mentioned, and Danielle, you mentioned, like, is this treasonous? If nothing else, if it's not treasonous, it's certainly a dereliction of duty, okay? Look, this is something that I brought up. I had September 11th, 2020. I was in a senior leader legal course for the U.S. military because I was a commander. And this is, at the end of the summer of the riots and insurrection that took place across the country in the wake of George Floyd's death. And there were lawyers, as part of this course, were talking about the methods by which you could allow your service members to participate in, protests. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, okay, hold on. At the time, you could clearly see that the protests were being led and orchestrated by Antifa and Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter, Inc., not the concept of Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter, Inc. is expressly and verbally a Marxist institution. You also had ties in with the Revolutionary Communist Party and its chairman, Bob Avakian, in the United States, calling for the removal of the sitting president. And these organizations, the Revolutionary Communist Party has a constitution. You can look it up. Google search it. Google search Constitution for the New Socialist Republic of North America, and you'll find a document that was agreed upon by the Revolutionary Communist Party 10 years ago. That is a problem if you have people causing damage in the country who are tied to an organization that expressly has a constitution meant to replace ours, and you in the military are trying to figure out how to allow your service members to go and participate in a protest. Okay? And I brought that up in the course. I said, look, we're 19 years past September 11, 2001. This is the anniversary today. And yet we still have nothing in the curriculum of the U.S. military that trains us on the doctrine that those jihadis had when they flew those planes into the buildings, the doctrine of Sharia. At what point, Danielle, you said treason, but if nothing else, it's professional competence, right? Like, if you have malpractice as a doctor, you can lose your license, right? Like, there is no bar for that when it comes to the military. And so that we've failed. So the last thing I'll just mention for your listeners, if they want to look it up on their own, don't believe me, believe the Chinese. Unrestricted Warfare, written by two People's Liberation Army colonels. Just Google search Unrestricted Warfare PDF. You'll find a link to a government site. It's a CIA translation. And you just go to page 144 to 152 and just read it. And you will see in the scenario that they lay out everything that they've been doing to us. And they laid this out almost 30 years ago.
And doing it, apparently doing it very selectively and clandestinely, because I can tell you, Tommy, that most Americans, or many Americans, do not understand the very lethal and direct threat that the Chinese Communist Party poses to our country right now, because, as I said earlier, we're not in a conventional war with them now, so they don't understand the threat. But thanks to organizations like yours, the Center for Security Policy, and all the great work you're doing, people are becoming more and more aware of it. And I just wanted to thank you on behalf of the State of Freedom for all of the work that you're doing. I know that it is so time consuming, got to be hard on your family and hard on you as well. What can civilians do in ensuring our security and helping your organization to be successful in fighting these threats?
Sure. Yeah. No, thanks, Chris, for asking. I mean, so, first off, people ought to just understand the world we're living in is a dangerous world. They need to be prepared as best they can. That, when you look at some of these threats, like the Chinese Communist Party, I mean, they're going to target our critical infrastructure, like our grid, for example. I mean, we could have a whole conversation about the grid in a different setting. Just the more prepared we are individually, as families, as communities, as states, the more we're going to be able to weather the storm coming from when it does become kinetic. So that's one thing. And so and then the other thing is just like getting smart on what threatens you and your community, ideological threats and infrastructure related threats. And that's what we do, right? So we can provide those kinds of educational briefings. And then the second thing is for us to be able to continue to do that, we obviously, I told you who we don't take money from, right? So that basically limits it to just Americans who care about our freedom, who have no vested interest or financial interest, who just want our work to continue, right? And so that's part of my job, and I'm still learning how to do it, is raising, the resources for us to continue doing that. And so, if anybody that feels moved to do that, of course, we have a donate button on our website, securefreedom.org. That's a way that they can help And so those are two things: be prepared and prudent and educated on your own, and then just support good organizations like yours and like ours that are doing our part to get the word out.
Well, there's nothing more important. And Danielle, let's make sure that we put the website in the show notes, which you always do so dutifully.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tommy, if people are interested in following you, do you have a Twitter handle, or is there anywhere that people can keep up with what you're up to?
Yeah, so the Center for Security Policy, this is what I would suggest. I don't have a Twitter handle myself, but our website, if you go to securefreedom.org, you'll see a spot where you can sign up at the bottom and subscribe. We do a daily brief, and there's an email each day that goes out with all the different analysis and articles that we do. We, of course, do have a presence on websites like Twitter, and you'll see the links on the website to that. But I would just say go to securefreedom.org and sign up as part of our the daily briefs, and that'll keep people informed.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you for your great work that you're doing for our country. Thank you for your service in the Marine Corps. And we will continue to follow you, and we will absolutely have you back on. And God bless you and Godspeed.
God bless you. Chris, what a privilege to get some time with Lieutenant Colonel Waller. I think he's one of those people whose eyes are wide open, and I think he sees the matters that he's speaking about very, very clearly and in stark terms. And I think he's also been very gracious to the people who did, a lot of people went out of their way to do what's wrong. And I think it sounds like he's a man that's got a lot of grace for people who are basically making life very difficult for other people.
Yeah, let's just be honest about it. He was forced out of the military because he refused to get the COVID shot. That's ultimately what happened, or in all likelihood, he would still be an active member of the United States Marine Corps. That's what happened to him, and the way he has responded to it has not been vindictive or malicious. He has simply moved on to something else. And, you talk about God having plans. What he's doing now, you could certainly make an argument, is of more critical importance even than his important service in the Marine Corps. I know that I feel very, very blessed that he's doing what he's doing because, Danielle, as I said earlier, there are a lot of people who really do not understand the threats that the Chinese Communist Party poses to this country, and it's not about conventional warfare. It's about this soft totalitarianism that is slowly creeping into our country, and they are steadily dismantling our infrastructure. And thank God for organizations like Tommy's that we can fight back and continue to build resistance against it.
Yes, and I'll just encourage our listeners, go to the website he mentioned, securefreedom.org, donate if you're able, and sign up for that daily brief email. I think it's going to be a huge part of us understanding how to be prepared ourselves and to have a clear picture of what's really going on in the world around us.
Absolutely, no question about it. It's going to take all of us, not just people like Tommy. It's going to take all of us to begin to wake up to the threats, because it is a world, the world we live in now is one in which sinister forces truly are trying to undermine the fabric of this republic that was built for us, and we cannot let that happen.
Yes, and maybe just one final admonition to our listeners to be prayerful, as he mentioned, about the Robert versus Austin case, that the Supreme Court would rule not in favor of immunity, but in favor of freedom, period, in favor of the Constitution and bodily autonomy.
Wouldn't that be nice if there was just a clean ruling that the military does not have the constitutional right to mandate any medical protocol on any active member of the military? Wouldn't that be a win worth writing home about? Absolutely. Well, we can certainly hope for it, pray for it, and work for it. Well, Danielle, I enjoyed spending time with you today. Can't wait to get Tommy Waller's interview up and posted for all our listeners to hear. And I want to thank our many State of Freedom listeners for their continued support, their continued prayers for us as we move forward and continue to build our infrastructure.
Yes, and if you'd like to support us to help us bring on more great patriots like Tommy Waller, you can do that at freedomstate.us. We really appreciate the support there. You can also mail us a check at P.O. Box 861, Berg, Louisiana. That's B-O-U-R-G, Louisiana. And not to forget, Tommy mentioned that he's spending a lot of time at state legislatures, and so do we. Through LCAG, you, Chris, were very instrumental in making sure that state sovereignty was reasserted in the state of Louisiana. And I think there's probably yet more work to be done on that front that we will be pursuing here shortly. But people can support those efforts at lacag.org and with a P.O. box.
And our P.O. box
in Baton Rouge.
In Baton Rouge, P.O. Box 64952, Baton Rouge, Louisiana 70896. And that's LACAG, L-A-C-A-G. We need your support, your donations, resources to continue to be your eyes, your ears, and your voice in the legislature to protect and preserve our liberty and freedom. We are honored and privileged to do it, but we need the resources, we need the infrastructure that we are building to do it. So any and all donations are appreciated and needed.
Yes. And before we leave, I'll just mention for any listener who may be already investing in precious metals, interested in investing in precious metals to diversify your own portfolio, or even starting a home-based business in that industry, Metal Stacks is a precious metals collectors club where you can buy your metals at the best prices on the market, actual dealer cost. Metal Stacks is beating the big sites. They have no credit card fees and no minimums. So if you're interested in purchasing metals, you can visit metalstacks.com/DWalker, and that helps me out. I get the commission. You can also refer people to Metal Stacks for an additional income. So if you're interested in that referral business aspect, you can email me directly at Danielle@freedomstate.us.
And amen to that. Danielle, each and every day, with God's grace, courage, and discipline, we will continue to take steps to preserve the great state of freedom in Louisiana.
Amen. Thanks, Chris.
Amen.
Thanks for listening to The State of Freedom. To stay on top of all the calls to action we mentioned today, just check out the show notes for the episode. If you'd like to support the show financially, visit our website at freedomstate.us. If you'd prefer to give by mail, you can send a check to The State of Freedom, LLC, at P.O. Box 861, Berg, Louisiana 70343. If you own a business in Louisiana and are interested in supporting our show by advertising, please email us at info@freedomstate.us. To get involved with Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, visit lacag.org, LACAG.org, or email Chris at chris@lacag.org. If you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe and share it. Give us a 5-star rating in the reviews. Thanks again, everybody. We'll see you next time.